Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Shoot the Shit, the podcast where I interview men because I want men to talk. Today I'm joined by Connor Duffy. Thank you very much for being here today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Lewis.
Great. So we've been introed through a mutual friend. He said that you are the man to speak to on all things the topic that we're covering today. So I'm really looking forward to this one. I'm really excited to hear a little bit about your story and just sort of get into it a little bit more complex and just sort of go through these issues one by one. But first and foremost, Connor, as with every guest that I have, I always start with the biggie. And in your own words, what makes you a man?
Well, that's a really good question. What does it? I would say, purpose. To make it succinct, I think purpose for me is the biggest one. I think purpose is what, for myself, was the day I turned from quote unquote a boy to a man. I think I had a reason to be here. I think anything prior to that, if you're living a life kind of just sort of self-serving, you're not quite there yet. For me, the day I realized that I had another reason to be here apart from just sort of my own experiences, I think was the day that I became a man, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's two things that I really love about that question, and I think it's something that I might make into a clip. Is the huge pause from everyone before they say an answer.
I wasn't expecting that at all.
Well,
Of all the questions I thought you were going to ask me, I even made some notes prior to the podcast. I wasn't expecting that.
It's a biggie. It's an important one for me. I think I've noticed that a lot of people are pausing around it, and I think there's two things. One, they want to give the right answer, but two, it's also that making sure it is the right answer is something as well. But yeah, purpose seems to come up a lot, and I think for me, you've hit the nail on the head. I think it definitely defines me as a man, and yeah, you're right. I think that's the turning point for boy to man. So sort of speaking about that, Connor, let's sort of go all the way back to the beginning, or as far back as you'd sort of want to go. Do you want to talk us through your sort of like earlier years and what that was like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. My earlier years are probably quite contradictory to where I am now in life. Grew up as a young man who was very interested in things. So grew up as a martial artist, was trained as a martial artist from the age of about 5 or 6 years old. And whilst I was doing that and going through my years at school, I was also very into things like art and creating things, movies, etc. I was very late to the party in terms of I wasn't really interested in going out and girls and all that at a young age. I was very interested again just in subjects and ideas and all of that kind of good stuff. But because of that sort of martial arts background, I was the kind of nerd whose art bag you didn't really want to steal. That was kind of my identity growing up. But I was throughout school. That's when I first, I think, became interested in sort of the current situation as is, and should we say the status quo. And I found myself being quite abrasive when I was thrust into an academic environment at school where I believed I could have potentially had a lot of talent that could have been tapped into if the right people would have come into my life at the right time. And unfortunately, I believe sort of there weren't the required role models that I think should have been there in the institutions where I went to school. And that's when I first realized that, hang on, down the line, I might be interested in becoming that person, because you're sort of looking around for the individual. And if you can't find an individual, unfortunately, you have to become an individual yourself, whether that's through sporting prowess or something creative like art. There wasn't anybody who saw me as a young man and thought, this kid is throwing absolutely everything into this. He needs somebody to show him the way. People were too busy, and dare I say it, with regards to teaching, you get a lot of people who can't do, therefore they teach, and in that situation they're not necessarily amazing at recognizing talent. That's not to say that I was the most talented individual in the world, but I was hardworking. So I was very anti-establishment. I was that lad at 16, 17 years old, used to turn up to school and had peroxide white hair and used to wear Dr. Martens instead of shoes, and kind of threw my middle finger up to um, the status quo, as I said, of school. Very different now, obviously being involved in the military. I was very anti, combined cadet force. You never would have seen me doing any of that. I hated it. I hated the confinement. I hated the um, people wanting me to be the same as everybody else, because in all honesty, I didn't have probably the respect I should have had for my superiors in those positions. Fast forward a few years, left school, did decide not to go to university because I believed that I was going to be a millionaire by the time I was 21. And I distinctly remember the night I was on a night out in a nightclub back home, and I saw some friends from university. And I think I asked one of them, "So when are you going to go back to university to restart your year?" And they said, "No, we're all done." I thought to myself, "It's been 3 years already." And they said, "Yeah, it's been 3 years." I thought, "Oh God, I'm not a millionaire.
Not a
I've
millionaire.
I've literally just I've literally wasted these 3 years." So spent a bit of time working as effectively a personal trainer. Ran a CrossFit gym for a few years, where
Nice.
that really gave me a huge step up in mentorship, and I was actually able to be that coach actually that I probably always wanted in my life. And what I found the most rewarding element of that was it'd be young individuals coming in, either just left school or were at school and were looking for that thing, that home to come to. And we were very, very lucky that we were able to provide that home for them.
Yeah.
And now I realize, then, okay, this is my passion. My passion is coaching, mentoring, and facilitating others to become the best that they can be.
Yeah.
Once that was done, I realized that I needed a trade, something that could help me out. So I turned my hand to arboriculture, effectively like tree surgery. Spent 4 or 5 years working for UK Power Networks, doing all that. Had a good enough time, and then I felt like I was coming towards the end of my 20s, and I really needed something that had that higher purpose, something that really, really. And there was one thing that was not ticked off. By this point, I had fought in mixed martial arts for a few years and competed at a relatively high level, and that really consumed my life for a period of time. I'd written a book. I'd spent some time off and gone away and written a book for a number of months, and I'd self-published that, and that box was ticked. You'd kind of done everything I wanted to set out and do, and there was just one thing that was left, and that was the kind of itch. I was like, maybe if I join the army, who knows? One day, driving to a job, and a good friend of mine turns around and he says, "Oh, you ever thought about joining the army as an officer?" I said, what's that? And he kind of gave me the Good Will Hunting line, which was, if you join the army as a soldier, you'll have a great 5 years. You'll have some great stories to tell. After 5 years, you'll come back and you'll kind of resume your life. But if you join the army as an officer, I'll never see you again. That's you to a T. I thought, okay, well, if that's the case, I probably should apply. I probably should find out what it is first. I probably then should apply. Applied thinking that I would never ever in a million years get in. Left half of the application form blank because I didn't have a degree, hadn't gone to Africa to do some charity work and build some wells. I had just lived a fairly, according to them, regular existence, just sort of working and making my way through life, and just took each stage as it came. But it was probably the first thing I've ever done where I just completely threw myself into it and thought, what, if I fail this, I fail this, but I would absolutely not leave any stone unturned. Fast forward in the application process, it takes about two years or so to get into Sandhurst, and I eventually got in and walked up the old college steps with 28 days left before I was too old to do so. So how's that for timing? Walked in, and in all honesty, I haven't really looked back since.
Amazing. Well, it's a great story, and we're obviously going to delve into it a little bit more detail. But I really want to sort of get involved with that early stage and that lack of mentorship, because I still believe that is a big issue with what's happening today. I think we're getting the wrong mentors, the wrong people that are being followed and sort of being listened to as young men. Do you Do you see anything that can be done for that, or is it a school issue? What do you see as sort of those stages?
Well, I think we are potentially prioritizing academia over things, or shall we say, lessons that we could be teaching young individuals that aren't necessarily on a curriculum. What you have is you have an establishment where somebody can go to school their entire life, then go to university, they stay at university, get their masters, then leave their university with a degree in, say, perhaps something like geography or English, which is, I can totally agree, is probably a very interesting subject to partake in and everything, and it's a great area of expertise. However, there's very limited amount of careers you can go into. So they turn around and go, well, I don't want to go, leave my degree behind or whatever. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to go into teaching, because that's kind of naturally what you do. But the teaching of the subject is what comes first, and what really should come first is the prioritization of wanting to work with young individuals and mentor them and help them. Um, my mother works at a school as a sort of student support manager, and I would be quite confident in saying that she has a much more proactive and positive influence on young individuals' lives than the teachers do. Because the teachers are there for a reason. They're there to teach a subject. They've got massive, shall we say, they have goals they need to achieve, they have deadlines they need to make, so they need to get so much in a certain amount of time, they need to get a certain grade. And it's kind of out of their hands. But I've spent a large period of time around teachers with us, mainly secondary school teachers, and I have to say, the conversation was very lacking inspiration. It was very, very lacking motivation. And these individuals aren't necessarily somebody that me as a young man, and I had a big character, and I definitely needed a big character to match me in order to guide me. That just wasn't found.
Yeah, it's I had a previous guest on by the name of Josh. He actively goes into schools right now and is sort of doing these sort of sessions. They're obviously additional; they're not part of the curricula, but he's sitting with young men from sort of like 8 all the way up to sort of 16 and having these conversations with them, having open conversations, which I think is really great. But it's just bringing that to scale. I was really fortunate. My school had loads of male teachers, which is quite a rarity in itself. And within that, I was failing. Well, I say failing. I wasn't reaching my potential. So the school put in a program that basically, if you were failing in 5 of your GCSEs, your predicted grade, you got a teacher to like help you through it. And it was my maths teacher. His name was Mr. Angus, and to be honest with you, I don't think he wanted to be a teacher. So it was sort of the opposite of that. So he was a great sort of role model. I found him quite an interesting guy. He obviously was very talented, very good mathematician, a very good teacher, but he also was he essentially just didn't give a fuck. It was just quite amusing at being in his lessons and also having that sort of mentorship. So I was in a bit of a different situation where I had that mentor from a teacher, which was great. But it's rare. It's definitely rare, and I think you end up with young men, looking elsewhere and not necessarily finding the right role model. They're sort of looking at an Andrew Tate, for an example, and sort of looking at this opulence as being the ultimate goal, whereas I think you would agree that isn't the ultimate goal of every man, is to make as much money as possible. You said yourself you wanted to be a millionaire by 21. I imagine once you realised that wasn't the case, how did that sort of view change?
It's a tough one, and I think again it comes from that little bit of naivety in life. It's interesting what you're saying about sort of role models is throughout school, being a bigger character, you naturally become either a class clown or you find yourself in trouble. And throughout my secondary school career, I found myself spending more time out of a classroom being sent out than I spent inside of a classroom. And I distinctly remember there was one teacher who I was doing my usual, I was acting up in a class, playing the class clown, trying to get some attention. And he sends me out the class. And I thought, oh God, here we go again. I hadn't been sent out of the class by this guy before, so I thought, oh God, he's going to absolutely freak out. So I go outside, wait outside, and I'll come and see you later. So he leaves me outside for a good couple of minutes, and I'm just sort of sitting there alone in my thoughts, thinking, oh God, this is going to be an absolute grilling. And he comes outside, closes the door behind him, and just says to me, just turns to me and just says, is everything all right? And it just took me completely back. What? And he said, is everything all right? You just don't really seem yourself. You're acting up, and I know you're not really, I just want to make sure that you're okay. And I remember just sort of standing in this corridor and almost being like brought to tears by this person who was just absolutely, solely interested in me and how I was doing it, and actually had correctly identified that everything wasn't quite all right, and that probably was the reason why I was acting up or doing whatever. And that's a real rarity, and that involves a lot of emotional intelligence to be able to, where he sees that in himself and he identifies that when he's like that, it's because of X, Y, Z is not quite right. Therefore, when he sees it in another individual, he can identify it and hopefully help them rectify it. That was a complete rarity, and that was literally one experience out of dozens and dozens of teachers. I think for me, then you leave school, and I was like, right, what's the goal? What's the objective here? What's the prize? Once you become very disenfranchised with the education system, and you don't like the people who are teaching, right? So if you're not looking at the people that teach you, and they don't inspire you, and then they turn around to you and say, well, you need to work hard, and one day you'll be like me. You have a leniency to turn around and say, absolutely not. That's not what I want to do. And kind of it has the adverse effect, as opposed to actually inspiring you to be involved in academia or work hard at a certain subject. So I left, and I thought, there's absolutely no way I'm going to university, because university is leading me down this path. I didn't really know what I wanted to do there anyways. So I think when you then leave school, it was like, well, where can I put all this energy into? And I was like, okay, I can put it into something, I can put it into a business, I can put it into trying to make money. But for me, what it really was, it was just me trying to be as successful. And the only way I could really measure that, the only metric was money, to show everybody else that they had been to university and wasted their time. And I had made the correct decision by choosing not to go to university. But it absolutely, really, in hindsight, probably wasn't the right decision to make, because I didn't really achieve much in that 3-year period. And I could have just gone to university, had a whale of a time, and got a degree, and it wouldn't have done me any harm. But I think I had a bee in my bonnet, and I had a point to prove. And that was to be anti-establishment even after school had finished, was to be anti-education. And that's a shame. I don't think people should leave school that way. And maybe it was a me problem, and the likelihood is it probably was mostly me. But it would have been nice to have encountered an individual at some point who helped me turn a corner and maybe change my mind.
Yeah, I don't think it's a unique problem. I think there's definitely a number of people that will have experienced similar things and wanted to go on to do different things. For me, university was a great experience. I was I'm still pretty introverted as a person, but university brought me out of my shell significantly. So I definitely believe there's benefits to both sides of the coin, and it's just what seems and feels right at the time is probably not necessarily the wrong decision. It's the right decision right then. Like you say, everything seems to happen for a reason and start to fit in. So it's sort of like a yin and yang with yourself, though. Like, so you obviously did the mixed martial arts, which is an extreme discipline to do that for so many years. Like, what was life like outside of school within that? Were the role models there? How did that? How was that?
So for me, martial arts was a safe space, and it was where I could somewhere where I could go and I could actually be myself. And what was really interesting is that I would go to school, and I would be this extremely kind of sort of loud individual who was probably a bit of a gobshite, in all honesty. Not really actually giving anything away in terms of like myself, but kind of putting on this act and trying to be liked or trying to be accepted, I suppose. For me, then, when I would go home, pack my bag, it was essentially a ritual. And I'd done martial arts, even then when I got to my teenage years, I'd done martial arts since I was 5, 6 years old. So for me, it genuinely is, it's like second nature. It's like walking. And I found myself when I would then go training, I would be just completely zen, and I'd be a very, very quiet individual because, and this is something that I identify with myself. The quieter I am, the happier I am. So a lot of the time, I actually am quite content. People will turn around to me and be like, "Are you all right? Are you okay?" And you don't potentially seem yourself, or you're being very quiet or vacant, perhaps. And the reality is, it's actually I'm okay. I'm very content. Therefore, I become quiet because I'm not feeling the white noise. And with martial arts, it's a it is an extreme discipline, but you're completely liberated. It's like going to the gym. There's rules that you have to follow and everything. But I know the rules. I know the social cues. I know the etiquette. So therefore, there's no working out. There's no gauging. There's no um, there's nothing that's left to be. There's nothing ambiguous. And I found that with martial arts as a teenager, I found that as a little bit of saving grace. Now, I lost it a little bit when I was perhaps 16, 17, because I was doing mixed martial arts. And this is now, you're talking, 13, 14 years ago. And people didn't understand what MMA was back then. They saw it as cage fighting and all that. And I had recently moved to a school that was had a much different demographic. When you tried to explain to these people what it was, they didn't understand it at all. They played rugby, they played hockey, they played cricket, and anything else was this just, step into obscurity. It was like, well, what is that? So I kind of, after a while, thought, well, in order to be liked, I'll just play rugby, and I'll turn away from the martial arts part. And I think it was something I didn't enjoy my time playing rugby. I think rugby would have been great if I would have picked it up as a 7 or 8 year old, and it was all I knew. But in all honesty, a martial artist playing rugby just doesn't make sense. Martial arts is a very is in terms of culture is literally the polar opposite, and in terms of a sport, again, it's polar opposite. And so for me with martial arts, it's and again, so I've gone through the whole process. I've gone through training as a young man, wanting to fight, eventually plucking up the courage to fight, then fighting, then competing a lot, then coaching, and now it comes to the point where got my black belts in jiu-jitsu, I've ticked the boxes, and now I actually use jiu-jitsu and training as more of a means of kind of I call it sort of recalibration. Like re-zeroing a weapon. It's like me zeroing myself. It's like, okay, I bring myself back to zero by going to training, doing something that I've done since I was a little boy. And so I've kind of come full circle, and it's quite interesting now being, a 30-year-old man who goes to training more for mental reasons. And I see this 19-year-old boy come into training, and I know why he's there. It's because he's watched UFC and he's got these grand expectations of potentially one day, maybe if I train, I'll be on the UFC or Cage Warriors or whatever. It's a very nice thing to say, and I'll never, ever, ever stop anybody from going through that process. I think it's a great process to go through. But it's a very much, you see in martial arts, the full circle happen in front of your eyes. It's very good to see.
Yeah, it's an interesting sport. It's something I've never done myself, but everyone seems to say that sort of that step onto the mat is like the switch just goes, and you're in that zone, and it's solely there. Although I imagine otherwise you're going to get very injured. So.
Yeah, I mean, even so, on a day-to-day basis, the amount of niggles and sores that I have in my body just from exhausting it effectively. As soon as I step on the mats, I put a gi on, I step onto the mats, and it's like I become as supple as a child again. It's like my body just remembers. So yeah, and that's it. You're in the moment. That's a lovely
Nice.
way to be.
I think every man is convinced they'll be a professional athlete. I think 30 is probably the age where we just go, you know what? Maybe not this time.
It might not be worth it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So yeah, I've taken up golf. I've still got vision, so you never know. I might get the PGA.
It's. I think it's just. No matter what I turn my hand to, I remember I was even talking to George recently about rowing and everything, and I've always used rowing as part of my conditioning. And I remember talking to him about times and stuff like that. He's like, "Yeah, you need to get this time in order to get into GB." And maybe even sort of saying to him, "Oh, who's the rower? Stephen Redgrave." how old was he when he got into Rome? He was really old when he got into Rome, right? And he was like, no, he was really old by our standards. I mean, like he was like 23, not 31. Okay, maybe not then. Maybe it's not going to work.
Yeah, just trying to find that sport. There'll be
Yeah,
one.
be darts potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to sort of look at your. There's a couple of interesting things in there. Like the first one that I really want to touch on because I think this is an important one, especially for a lot of young men, is you saw that 16, 17 impressionable age, want to impress people, want to have friends. You decided to make that switch and start to play rugby. Is social pressures and that sort of thing, is that something that you're well past now, and sort of like what's your other experiences been with social pressures? Because it's a huge thing and we're all guilty of it, and I think we'll always be guilty of it, but it's just coping and to get your side of it.
I mean, are you truly ever past it? I don't think you necessarily are. And I think that's kind of when you hear a lot of Stoics talk about really what Stoicism is not doing what you initially desire or what you kind of instinctively desire and kind of pushing past that. And I believe it's every man's, everybody can walk around and say, well, I'm an alpha male. I just genuinely don't care what anybody thinks about me and I do what I want and I beat my own drum. I don't think they're necessarily being completely truthful. I think there's a certain level of you can try and cash out and go, you know what, I kind of give up the ghost and I don't care so much. And I think for me, being 30 was a huge turning point. Like I'm massively enjoying my 30s because of that, because you do get to a level of where it's almost exhaustion, where you just don't care anymore because you're like, you know what, it is what it is, and if people don't accept me or don't like me for whatever reason, that's their problem. But I think mainly it comes down to having self-worth or self-value. And the only way you're going to achieve that is by going out there and doing things that you value yourself. For example, a big one for me was I don't think I would have valued myself as much unless I had stepped in the ring or cage and actually fought, because it was something that I valued. And I think once I'd started doing that, that was a bit of a turning point for me in wanting to be accepted and all that, because I had value in myself. So if somebody didn't want to get on board with me, then that was their problem. And I think the second one for me was joining the army and now doing what I do. And I think now, because it was something that it was a path less trodden, it was something that was difficult, it was arduous, it was something that you accomplish. I think then that then leads the individual to then go, well, if I don't get accepted into whatever group, then whatever. But everybody is, to an extent, a chameleon. Everybody, to an extent, is putting on a mask in order to fit into a certain environment. That's human nature, is how we survive. If you stick out in every single environment that you thrust yourself into, you're just not going to survive. You're going to have a really, really hard time. As a youngster, I was privy to it to an extent, and my stint of bending to it was very, very short-lived, I believe. And I think I never truly immersed myself in it anyway, because I knew I was kind of losing myself, and I just want to do that. I think I've always, to an extent, marched to my own beat. I've entertained things, and I think the whole rugby thing and turning my back on really who I was happened, but I only really dipped my toe in, and I tried it out. Very early on, knew it wasn't for me, and I think I effectively entertained it for a period of time. And I think I valued the wrong people. I made friends with probably people who didn't really want to be friends with me. I was trying to make friends with the cool kids and whatever. And actually now in hindsight, in retrospect, they weren't as cool as I thought they were, but obviously that's always the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think the big one for me is just sort of finding that identity and purpose within yourself and going, well, that's who I am, and kind of then creating your own path. Experience and age is a massive thing. And you see it a lot of time, even when people enter relationships, they'll lose themselves, they'll lose their identity. And I do tend to, I've been privy to it, I've been guilty of it massively, where I've fallen from who I am And there's one little trick that I always kind of use, and that's I always ask Momo, and Momo is the nickname my dad gave me when I was a little boy. And what I always do is, if I find myself I'm falling away from who I am, I always look back and I ask Momo, and I always say, right, like, what does Momo think of this? And Momo is always right. And basically, Momo is just another word for my gut.
Yeah.
And if I walk into somewhere, I'm in an environment, and Momo's screaming at me, in my 20s, I used to suppress him, and I used to kind of, ignore him. Now in my 30s, I always listen to Momo. Like, he is the driving factor beyond, for most of my decisions, because I find him to be far more accurate than sort of, the prefrontal cortex of my brain, who, seems to make these logical decisions. He knows straight away. And I think that's, for me, was maturity and growing up. I think as a child, you know exactly what you want to do, you know exactly where you want to be, and you know exactly who you want to spend your time with. And then what happens is that you go through this thing called apparently growing up, where you just unlearn your natural instincts as a child, and you kind of forcibly thrust yourself into environments where you're not naturally supposed to be in. And then when you get to 30, you then turn around and go, actually, you grow up by actually becoming a child again, in that kind of weird circle, where, when you get children and they just seem to really pick up on things, and they'll just be like, I don't like him. And you're like, well, why? And they're like, I just don't like it. I want to go home. I don't want to be here. And you're like, that's so illogical. It's so irrational. Like, well, why? And the reality is because they know. And I think you know, and I know, when you're in a situation that you don't want to be in, you're with a group of friends. And if I really was to give advice to be honest, 99% of my advice to people now is, I literally just say, what does your gut tell you? Just ask Momo.
Nice. That's a nice way of looking at it. I think there's a couple of things that I really want to pick out from that as well. Is like, one thing when I turned 30 as well was, I had a similar vision to yourself, millionaire, retired by 30. I now live in a world where I want to work forever. I never want to retire. Like, I want to enjoy what I'm doing. So, like, I'm never gonna stop that. But one of my things that I sort of picked up when I sort of turned 30 was the wheel of life, and having these sort of like 8 sections to your life. So it's very hard when you've got 8 things to focus on to become lost in one thing. So whether that's a relationship, or whether that's a hobby, or whether that's a family member, or whatever that might be, as long as you have a more full life, essentially a wheel rather than just a section, you're always going to be moving forward. You're always going to be doing, like you say, doing what you want to do is in that sort of child phase, and just essentially enjoying life without feeling any pressure. Because if something's wrong within one, you sort of have 7 things that are outlets and things that allow you to try and sort of move away from that, rather than being crushed, or potentially feel pressure, or feel like that you need to fix it, or do something that you didn't want to do to make that work, because you've got such an abundance, essentially. So that's my view on it, which is sort of a different angle than speaking.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think growing up, even as a young man in my 20s, I was that guy who wouldn't eat a Domino's pizza, because it was like, I've got to be good. And you realise that, and I see it. That's probably the biggest killer I see it in young men at the moment, when it comes to, even if they want to say, if they came in like, I want to fight, and look, this is just going to take time. Rome wasn't built there. It's going to take you 10 years to get there.
Yeah.
But because when you're younger, you're extremely impatient, and you want everything almost instantaneously. So therefore, what you do is you become so overly dedicated in order to get the immediate success that you desire. And maturity tells you that this isn't going to happen overnight. So actually, the best thing I can do is to not burn out, because all these people, they come in, they're absolutely 100% in. They live and breathe jiu-jitsu, whatever. They never last. And you see it all the time with officer training. The people that came in hot, like they just lived and breathed it. They were the ones that didn't necessarily last and definitely didn't do very well. And the ones that did very well were the ones that had this amazing thing called balance, where, yeah, you know what you can do? You can work Monday to Friday quite hard, pretty damn hard actually, and then you can go out for a drink on a Friday. And you know what? It's not going to affect your fitness. And you know what? It's not going to undermine all the hard work you've done during the week. What it's actually going to do is, even if you went out absolutely steaming and you woke up the next day and you felt disgusted with yourself, it'd actually help you refocus, because you'd actually wake up the next day and you feel that you've inspired to now make up for the apparent lost ground that you've had. I was that guy who, very rarely drank, ate super clean, and it didn't allow me to perform whatsoever because I put so much pressure on myself to perform. Where I had done everything to 110%, there was absolutely no excuse for me to underperform. That's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing to have. It's a lot of pressure, a lot of self-induced pressure. It's like I was carrying two sandbags on my shoulder the entire time.
Yeah.
I think the maturity allows you to kind of you kind of have perspective. I understand these things are going to take time. If you're building a business, it's going to take 10 years. You can work 24 hours a day if you want, buddy, and all power to you. But regardless, it's going to take 10 years. You can't. You're not in a time machine. These things are just going to take time.
Yeah, you've always got to have your own lessons, right? Like, you can watch as many self-help videos and listen to as many of these podcasts as possible, but the ultimate experience is that true, just living it, failing it, repeating, and actually learning from these things. It's important to also have both sides of the coin almost, but it's that emotional intelligence to spot it and say, actually, rather than quitting, it's like, okay, what can I address to keep this part of me and actually move it sort of forward in that sense. In a previous life, I used to work with ex-footballers, and they're like sort of lower league, so they would finish 34, 35, 36, and they were earning decent money, and then all of a sudden they just didn't have anything to do because it was just football was their life, and they were like, well, I don't really want to be a coach. So that was sort of like the premise of what we were doing, was like essentially giving them a career after sport, but they just had nothing. It was just football, and that was it. They had no outside sort of interest, which was quite strange, really, even because it's not like they're training 24 hours a day, like you say. So yeah, it's
being all in. And as well, with regards to mistakes, I've kind of always lived by the adage, and I kind of came up with this in my 20s, and it was, you don't need to be smart enough to not make mistakes. You just need to be smart enough to learn from the mistakes that you're inevitably going to make. Meaning, you could read all the books you like, and for me, I was that guy. I read anything Stoicism. I read it. Marcus Aurelius, Cicero, Seneca. I ate the whole thing up. I thought I knew what Stoicism was, and the reality is I didn't, because I hadn't lived it. And it was only then, when certain things happened in my life that I had absolutely no control over, I was then forced to execute Stoicism in order to survive. And that's when I actually learned it. And it didn't come from any pages, it didn't come from any audible book or any video. It literally came from being in a situation where I was like, right, okay, I have no other option but in order to change my perspective on this thing. And that's when I learned Stoicism. That's when, I say I don't like I know Stoicism, but that's for me when I began to understand it.
Yeah, it's life's practical, right? You can't live it in books. You've just got to live it. So you've obviously taken that step now into as an officer. You've passed out, right? You're all official. Yep. So congratulations.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Talk me through Sandhurst a little bit, as much as you can sort of go into, because there's obviously, again, pressures, wanting to achieve. Like you say, you'd only just made the cut. There's no second chance because a month later you'd be too old to go. So, how are you feeling day one on that sort of side of things?
So for me, it was interesting. I had a lot of what we call G1 going on in the background. I had a lot of personal and social things that were going on in the background. And for me, there was a huge element of imposter syndrome where when they accepted me, I almost didn't believe them. And this is, I think, it's mainly because I had, with regards to a lot of things I'd done in my life, I just simply didn't quite make the cut. And you get to a certain point in your life where when you then receive this really, really good news, you kind of tend to be a bit like, I'm not too sure if this is, you want to double check this. There was a clerk error here or something. I remember finding out about that. They got in, didn't really believe them. And I even remember then driving up to the front gate and my parents behind me in the car, 30-year-old man, and they were still wanting to come with me, which is amazing. It was like they wanted to see me sort of go up the steps. And this was during the COVID time still. So they weren't allowed to come into the chapel and do the whole tour, but they could literally park up their cars, give me a hug and watch me walk up the steps. And I remember pulling up to the front gate and I said, so say my name. So I was Connor Duffy, I'm here, here to start commissioning course 221. And I remember the guard at the gate looks at my list and goes, I can't find your name. I thought, that's probably about right. It probably was a mistake. I'll just make my way back. It's fine. It's only an hour and a half drive. It's fine. And then he's like, oh, no, you are here. Lets me in. I'm driving through Sandhurst in my car and my parents behind me. And I'm literally looking at them going, oh my God, they let me in. And then it even got to a point where I was walking up the steps and I was expecting somebody as I was walking up the steps to like rugby tackle me off the steps and be like, intruder, you're not supposed to be here. We accepted you on a gardening job. You're not supposed to be actually doing the course. Oh yeah, fair enough. My bad. My mistake. Sandhurst it's an absolute, it is a bit of a pressure pit. It's one of those things that anything you do in the army at the time seems like it's really, really difficult. And then what you do is you complete it and then you look back and you go, it wasn't that bad. It's really, really bad for it. So we've even just recently just finished at the infantry battle school and platoon commanders battle course, which is it's a very arduous course, and it's 4 months in the Brecon Beacons, getting soaking wet and getting thrashed and not sleeping much and doing everything that's really not that fun in order to get us sort of ready for platoon command in the infantry. And it's one of the things at the time you're having the most god awful time. And then you'll be on the coach on the way back, or you'll get your sort of first pint down at the weekends or something. You're telling you, it wasn't that bad. And it's kind of the same with Sandhurst. I do look back now and I go, it wasn't that bad, but there were real times where, for me, when I was juggling outside of the army at the same time. So at the same time, I was going through a legal battle concerning my daughter, and I was taking my ex-partner to court and representing myself whilst being at Sandhurst. So for me, it's safe to say my cup was full. And I had reached what we call my limit of exploitation, and there wasn't really much more I could take on. There were days where, I would lock the door to my room and I would probably just shed a tear, and I was overwhelmed. I didn't really know what to do, and I was exhausting all of my options. It was costing thousands and thousands of pounds in solicitors' fees at the start before I started representing myself. And again, that's something I'm very passionate about, is eventually helping those do the same thing I did, but without going through solicitors, and sort of creating a pathway for them to take. But I found that to be the hardest part for me of Sandhurst, that the training it's all consuming. You're there, you wake up in the morning, you're on parade at 0600 singing the national anthem, and then as soon as you finish singing the national anthem, you are against the clock, you are against the clock, right up until 2300, 11 o'clock at night. You are doing either lessons or lectures, or you're going, and it's very good, Sandhurst, at just completely consuming your time. And if you were to actually sit back and go, what have I actually achieved today, it wouldn't be necessarily quantifiable, but what it's done is it's consumed you You've changed your order of dress 5 times a day, so you've got 3 shirts to iron when you get back to your room. You've got shirts to, shoes to bull. You've got trousers to get sorted and all that. So what it does is it's very good at indoctrinating you into being busy perpetually, and always trying to maintain a certain level of appearance despite being absolutely exhausted, despite completely not knowing what you're doing, in all honesty, most of the time. And the army way of teaching you is very much like, we'll teach you once and then we'll start assessing you on it. You'll fail the initial assessment. You'll be so stressed out about failing that assessment because the next one is your final chance. And then you'll do the next assessment and you realize it wasn't that hard in the first place and you'll pass it with flying colours. And you'll go, what was all that about? But you do that for a year until eventually towards the end you start to realize the game. You go, okay, I need to stop stressing out about these things. So what happens is you become a master at spinning plates, having all these things going on at the same time. But like the duck with its feet under the water, you're kind of looking, remaining quite calm. And that's what Sandhurst teaches you. It teaches you you've got 8 minutes to get to the mess hall, queue up for your food, eat food, get back, change your uniform, sign this form and get out on parade. Go. Okay. And you get very good at dealing with that. So after a year, you kind of become a master at work. You can do the work, you can do the workload. And that was the biggest thing. We have regimental selection board, which is a very, very stressful period where effectively you are assessed. I think by the time I got to my regiment, I think I worked out that I'd had 17 interviews by the time I actually got my final job with the Irish Guards. It's quite an arduous process if you think about it. It's quite, that's quite intense. Having interviews with colonels and generals, and they are assessing quite literally you inside and out. Again, it's one of those things that you're used to. It's really hard at the time. So, to sort of sum up, I would say Sandhurst definitely elevates you in that regard.
It's really interesting that we've just been talking about living in the real world and failing, and that's literally how they do it in the army. So one of the, if not the most successful armies in all of human history. So they must be doing something right. So
absolutely. Yeah, it's we have soldiers, officers come from other countries, and they come and they train with us on occasions, and they're always sort of taken aback by the amount of stress we put ourselves under. Seemingly, you'd think for no apparent reason, like there must be easier ways to do this, but they don't really. I wouldn't say they don't care, but they're not necessarily that bothered about how good you are in terms of doctrine. Can you, to the T, do a set of orders or carry out an action? What they care about is your capacity to function under pressure, because the situations we find ourselves thrusted into is forever changing. Wars forever changing, conflicts are forever changing. And our jobs forever changing. They just want to see your capacity for adaptation. And if they can see that, they go, well, the rest will come over time. He'll figure it out, or she'll figure it out. So that's really what they're just trying to get at. So you are assessed to an inch of your existence.
Nice. Well, again, congratulations. It's not, like you say, not everyone makes it. So congratulations for finishing. You touched on it briefly. You said you had additional pressures as well, which some guys didn't have. I imagine the majority didn't have any additional pressure. It was just solely doing Sandhurst. But there was a few things that you sort of mentioned there, and I'd love to hear a little bit more of that side of things and sort of your next steps with it as well.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where you find yourself in a situation where I basically had a relationship with somebody, and that person, whilst they were pregnant, just decided that they didn't want that relationship anymore. okay, that's fine. The army thing at the time was kind of burning in the background, and I was kind of working towards it. I was doing the initial assessments, and I was slowly progressing through it, but initially it was just a pipe dream. So what effectively happened to me was I got zeroed. I had not a lot in terms of career and that, and I had kind of sacrificed a lot in order into this individual and into this potential life and family and all that. And one day somebody just decided that it wasn't for them anymore, and they just took it away. And you know what? You can't really be angry at that, because okay, it was it was probably for me an extreme low point. Um, I really, really struggled at that time. And but in that, no matter how hard it was, and it genuinely was, I would say the hardest period of my life. It as as cliche as it sounds, it genuinely taught me the best lessons I've ever learned. And during that period of time, I personally was very lucky that I had mentors in my life. My best friend, he's a few years older than me, and he had been through something very, very similar. And so every time I didn't know what to do, I didn't know what to say, I didn't know how to approach this person, I didn't know how to go on, I would quite simply pick up the phone, and he would say just the right thing. I had parents that were extremely supportive, and they would say just the right thing. And that was actually genuinely what got me through. And then they'll all turn around and say, "Oh, you would have done it anyways. You would have got through it anyways, and you would have thrived anyways." And I'm genuinely not sure if I believe them, because I distinctly remember all those phone conversations where I would hit a new low point, where I really would start to lose faith. And it was their experience, especially my friend's experience, where he had been through it. He knew exactly what was coming around the corner. So he would pre-warn me, and he would be like, right, you need to do this, this, and this, this, and this. And it helped me so much. And then the second thing that helped me was, as I was going through this, is when I realized that I need to pass my assessments. I need to get into Sandhurst. That was the only time in my life my back was really up against the wall, and I needed to make something work. And it's something that I had lacked throughout my sort of very, very brief fighting career. Was I started fighting, had all the potential that you needed in order to go the distance, but I just lacked the motivation, in terms of I lacked the necessity to compete. This was the first time in my life where I needed to make something work, and by God, was I going to get it done. That then inspired me to really throw myself into what I was doing, and probably against the odds, then accomplish something and get into Sandhurst. That was all going on in the background, and my daughter was born 2 months almost exactly prior to me joining Sandhurst. And it was very, very awkward, because a lot of people would be like, "Oh, you've got a new daughter." They'd ask me questions, and the reality is I'd seen my daughter a handful of times, because that's all I was allowed, and there was all these different things going on. And that person who was doing that to me, and only over time, you realise that abuse can be done onto men, as much as it can be done onto women. And that took me a really long time to actually realise that over a period of time I was actually being abused. But that person is that individual, that was something else entirely. I wasn't too fussed with that. For me, I alluded to it at the start of the podcast, you alluded to it, that focus, that purpose. As soon as I knew that I had somebody that counted on me, it became so easy to be inspired. It became so easy to want to get things done. So as much as it was definitely at times a distraction, you get extremely good at compartmentalizing these situations and going, right. So I kind of came up with a format, and the format was, I do the best I can with what I have, right? There's only so much I can do. So I was in this situation where, as a man, what you want to do is you want to control absolutely everything that you touch, because that's just man's nature. So when you come into a relationship, you want to provide, you want to do everything, you want to pay the bill, you want to drive the two of you home, you want to make sure that person gets home safe and that they're provided for. It's not a dirty thing, it's just human nature. Now when somebody completely takes that away from you, and now they take away that capacity to do it for your daughter, for your child, then the brain starts going absolutely mad, and it literally just wants to implode. So I had to really, that's what I was alluding to earlier with really learning stoicism, that's when I then had to really swallow the pill and go, okay, do the best with what you got at the time that you have it, and the rest now is just up to God. You just have to let it be. And I started kind of utilizing that prior to Sandhurst in a big way. And I remember a really good conversation with my best friend. I was on the phone. I was like, I don't know what I need to do. Should I just get in my car and drive to the house and try to rectify this and just try and figure out what's in this person's thought process? And he just said to me, he said, Connor, do you want to join the army or not? Do you want to be an officer or not? I said, well, yeah. He said, then what you're going to do is you're going to put your phone down, throw it down the stairs, whatever you need to do. He said 2 hours. And you're going to open your books and you're going to study and you're going to prepare for 2 hours. And he said, and after 2 hours, then call me and see where your head's at and see if you still want to go down there and try and rectify it. He said, I bet you won't. And what you do is you become very, very good at going, okay, what do I actually have control over? Not very much. Okay, good. So the things I have control over is my perspective. And for me, it was like sending an email. So I send an email to a solicitor. I send an email here, try to arrange a visit, try to arrange a contact, try to do this, send some money, whatever I needed to do. Once that was done, was there anything else that I could have done? No. So there was no point me sitting there and stressing and being upset and crying about it. The best thing I then could have done next to that was try and be the best that I could at my job in order to excel, in order to create a life or a platform so that I'm then able to fight my corner and fight this dragon that's guarding the princess, shall we say. The knight needs to go away, he needs to sharpen his sword. If he just spends his whole time at the castle, he's not going to get anything done. He needs to go away, he needs to prepare, make himself strong, and then he needs to so then he can then eventually do what he needs to do. And that's what I found myself doing, is like, okay, this is what I have, this is my situation as is. What can I do right now to rectify it? And anything else, I just have to let it be and let it play out.
Yeah, it's such a tough thing to go through a breakup, but a breakup with, like you say, something else that you were looking forward to, this vision, this sort of family that you created, I guess, as well. Once you sort of know, once to lose both of that, and that is, I can only imagine. Thankfully, I've not been.
Yeah, I wouldn't wish it on genuinely wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. However, I think that and this is why it kind of comes up. This is the main reason why I find myself wanting to talk to people like yourself and do things like this, is because of those individuals at that time that had the experience. And the experience is a big one. I think experience would have been my word next to purpose. The next one is experience. That, what I would consider that makes a man. If I wouldn't have had those individuals that had that experience at the time, that were able to mentor me, I genuinely don't know how I would have got through it. So for me now, I look around and I see men in a similar situation, and they don't have those same mentors, and I just instantly go, okay, how can I talk to them? How can I then now tell them that it will work out and it will all be okay, or whatever? And you can see now why, without the mentor, why people now get it so wrong. And it's, can you really blame people? But that's why mentorship and these types of things that we're doing right now, I think, are just so important.
Yeah, I think emotion is naturally going to be high in any of those scenarios. I've been through a breakup myself recently, and your emotion, you're like you say, can I fix this? What can I do to sort of revert it? And that sort of plays in your head. There's so much waiting time from that side of things, and just letting things be. It takes experience is a great word. Calmness is really important, and I think the added pressure of essentially a bureaucratic legal system which is designed to be painstakingly slow will only sort of add to those pressures and that urge to do something as you like you say, what can I control, and trying to force things and thinking outside the box and trying to come up with a solution. But that experience and those mentors that you talked about allowed you to sort of be like, I've just got to wait now. Like, I've done what I can do, and the next thing is waiting. Which, yeah,
It's 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 so funny because literally right before everything sort of happened, I remember I was reading the Count of Monte Cristo, and I don't know if you're familiar with the story. Um, you know, for those that don't know, you've got Dante, who's this kind of young, upcoming captain of a ship. Um, and this is said, I believe, in sort of like 1700s, I believe, France. He's a captain of a ship, young captain, has a beautiful fiancée. Everything's going well for him. He's charismatic. Everything's going well. Uh, Two people are very jealous of him. One's jealous of his career. One's jealous of his fiancée. They conspire and plot against him to get him effectively arrested for nothing. One takes his job. One takes his fiancée, and he's banished to this prison for no reason. Never gets told why, and he gets banished there for years and years and years. Ends up meeting this cardinal who educates him and teaches him the way of the land, and ends up giving him this inheritance of this extreme wealth on Monte Cristo. So he ends up becoming the Count of Monte Cristo. But I remember just reading that book. His revenge and the way he does things is just so patient, and he's able just to sit in this cell with his thoughts and just wait for his opportunity, for his moment to allow things to happen. And I remember just reading this book thinking, how on earth, I can't imagine having this level of patience. I can't imagine being this type of individual and not wanting to break out of the cell and do something. So, well, that cell does exist. It's just, like you said, it's the bureaucracy of a law system. That's the confinement in which I work in on a day-to-day basis. And funny enough, this whole situation has brought me to a situation not too dissimilar from that, where you're sitting there, and really the only thing I can do is I can just sit here, I can moan about it, I can cry about it. That doesn't really change the situation. Anything that changes the situation for me now is just being patient and hopefully allowing the things that I've put in place now to eventually bear fruit and for things to work out happily ever after. But it takes a lot. It really takes a lot.
really does. I think what's quite nice there is we touched on it earlier about this, like, these young men turning up to mixed martial arts and just being like, I'm going to put everything into this, and everything and everything and everything, burning out and disappearing and sort of losing out on that dream, not getting what they want. In this position that you found yourself in, you've almost been able to take those experiences and use it to be calm and just allow it to run its course. Because, like you say, if you did something during that time, it could have potentially ruined the end of what that looks like. So it's sometimes it is very important to just
Sometimes you've got to say la vie, and you have to let people do people. The biggest one for me, a takeaway word, is expectation. You just manage your expectation about things. It really does allow you to see more good in certain things as they happen. Not expecting too much. I've been to court now 3 times, due to potentially go back for a fourth over this thing, and every time I've come away disappointed. And that's just due to expectations. You're expecting to go to court and the judge to go, that person did what? You know, the gavel goes down and everything's rectified and papers go in the air like Legally Blonde, and everything's fine and dandy. It's not the case. It's a very long, it's like pulling teeth. It's a long, arduous process where you very, very small incremental gains. And that's for me as a life lesson that I would love, to bestow onto younger men, is that just level of patience and expectation. Like, even with MMA, my biggest advice to people that want to compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu: pack a bag in the back of your car or your mate's car or whatever, competition bag. That bag goes with you every single weekend to anywhere in the country where there is a competition. Win, rain or shine, you turn up to the competition. You'll either win, lose, or whatever. You'll have a bad day, you'll have a good day. One day you'll turn out, you won't feel very well. One day you'll feel flat. One day you'll feel really energetic. One day you'll perform really well and you'll still lose. One day you won't perform and you'll still win. And all it is just experience. It's just adding to that sort of paper mache of what you're eventually going to be. For me, I was that guy who trained at 1,000,000 miles an hour to do one competition a year that I thought I was going to win. Well, guess what? I didn't win the competition because I wasn't competing all the time.
Yeah.
I'll be devastated. That's not the way to do it. Drop the ego, be the fool, be the one who learns all the time, and just throw yourself into it and understand this is going to take a really, really long time. And you're going to look like an idiot, in your opinion, not others. You're going to look like an absolute idiot, noob for a period of time. You just have to accept it, learn to love it, and eventually one day you'll be at the top of your game. You look around the room and you go, oh my God, when did this happen? I feel like it was overnight. I'm now the guy. That's just the way it works.
Yeah, it's really nice. So like me, when I started this, it was like I had zero expectations of anything ever happening. My whole goal was to just speak to people and hope that they just got some comfort out of having a conversation with another man that they might not have been able to have had for whatever reason in the past. And obviously I'm now speaking to more people and we're looking at a number of things, but that was the ultimate goal. But you touched on something that was really nice, and it's something that I've started to come to a realization as well, which is like this. I'm going to use the word mental health, and this like sort of ideology of it is like this curingness of it, and being able to be just better and being always happy. And that's just not the case. And you summed it up really nicely with your analogy there. Like you just going to be turning up every day in life in general, and you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days, but it's how you react to all of that. Like if you become egotistical and essentially unenjoyable to be around when you're having a good day, when you have a bad day, you're probably not going to have the people around you to support you. So it's that balance. And again, patience is a really nice word that we've sort of come to, that just allow you to live your life no matter what's sort of being thrown at you. And that's sort of where I'm at now, is like this contentment is probably a nice word as well. It's like shit happens to this life, right? And it can be good and it can be bad. And yeah, I think it was nice that you sort of touched on that as well, because for me that's what I want to get out into the world, is this: stop looking over there, stop comparing yourself to yourself, just live your life and try and get some contentment with it.
I think the biggest one for me is, you hear it all the time with men's mental health, and I think sometimes the biggest thing for me is we're trying we think one size fits all in terms of what would help potentially females in order to get through certain things doesn't necessarily fit with men. And we're getting a lot of individuals that are coming from which I think is absolutely fine. I think they're definitely right to an extent, is this kind of a very feminized approach to men's mental health, which is you just need to literally talk and be happy. It's like, well, happy is something that you can't really measure, and happiness is so fleeting, and men aren't desiring happiness whatsoever. What they're desiring is fulfillment. They're desiring purpose. So for me, what men actually need is, men need mentorship and they need a plan. They need, okay, so what do I actually need to do? And then when they have these moments that you kind of are alluding to, where you're kind of getting in your own head, and you're that was the whole point of martial arts. That's why you have a sensei. That's why you have a coach. It's because he's walked the path less trodden. Also, he knows what lies ahead of you. So he's able to give you wisdom. I think a massive thing we're lacking at the moment in modern society, especially in men, is wisdom. Is wisdom being passed down from person to person in order to enrich or help people in their lives? There isn't any. It's just sit around, have a cup of tea and chat and cry about it. It's like, but men want answers. Men want solutions to their problems, because men are problem solvers. It's like when you're in a relationship, the women are from Venus, men are from Mars argument, where a man's constantly trying to solve his partner's problems, and she's like, I don't want to solve the problems, I just want to air them out. It's like, well, okay, men don't necessarily get much from just airing things out. It's very good to get things off your chest, but men want somebody to wrap an arm around them and go, right, listen, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get you out of this. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, and this is how you're going to get yourself to where you want to be. For me, I've got like a lot of sort of tenets that I kind of tend to go to, is like deadly sins as a for a guy with regards to mental health now, and there's things there's rules that I kind of like to live or like to abide by. And I think the biggest one for me, I think the one for men who are suffering with mental health, the number one rule is, I call it going for a walkabout. And it's in every tribal ancient culture, there's a certain there's almost a ceremony of when a boy becomes a man. What he does is he takes himself off into the wilderness for a period of time and goes and finds himself and goes and encounters struggle and strife that will change him forever. He goes away and he goes and gets his purpose. He goes and gets his fulfillment. He leaves the nest and he goes and does something worthwhile. And I would definitely recommend any man who is currently suffering or is shall we say, feels that there's a void that needs filling, is whatever you're scared of right now in life, genuinely, whatever you're absolutely shit scared of, sign up, go do it. Because for me, where your fears lie, where your discomfort lies, where you don't want to do things, that's absolutely where you should be. I was shit scared of fighting, always was. I genuinely remember before one of my fights standing at the top of a flight of stairs and thinking to myself, if I throw myself down this flight of stairs and break a leg, I won't have to fight tonight. That's how scared I was.
Yeah.
But as soon as I did it, it was the best decision that I ever made. You know, and even now, what I do, there's absolutely things now in my future that are more risk averse than getting a 9 to 5 and sitting on the couch and all that. And there are sacrifices to make for it and everything. But I'm now looking for fulfillment rather than just like happiness.
Yeah.
Happiness is fleeting. Like, I can go now and go get a McDonald's and go get a chicken Big Mac. I'll be really happy for a period of time. I'll be like a pig in muck. Yeah. But eventually the Big Mac will go and I'm like, well, now what? Right? Whereas fulfillment, like for me, for example, having my daughter, that's fulfillment. That's everlasting. You know, at any one point, I'm filled with love because of that. So I think that's the big one for me with regards to men's mental health, is I think we're approaching it from a very, very, for me, a slightly wrong approach, where we're just sort of trying to talk and not do. Because
I agree with you.
It's not working, right? It's not working because right now, you know, as we all know the statistics, you know, the thing that's going to kill statistically myself and yourself before we're 40, most likely, is suicide.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a horrendous stat now. And everybody's like kind of talking about it a little bit. And the band-aid we're putting on it is men just need to talk more.
Yeah.
Okay, well, men are talking more now, and it's still going up, and it's still happening. So now what? And what we're actually dealing with, in my opinion, is an epidemic. Yet what we're doing about it is, they just need to talk more. It's like, no, that's not working. We need something. We need something that's actually gonna solve the problem.
Yeah, 100%. It's like I commute into the office twice a week, and the train station poster is a Samaritan's one, and it says, "Gary, there's always someone there to talk." And I'm like, I know many Garys, and Gary is the epitome of a man that doesn't want to talk. Like, yep. He's the opposite of a man that wants to talk. So it's quite, I guess, I imagine they chose that name for that reason, that they wanted like this older generational name to it. But for me, it stands out as like, that's the one man that's never going to talk.
And it tells you the level of actual emotional intelligence of these sometimes organizations where you think you're so off the mark. And it's again what we're speaking about comes in around the circle with regards to teachers. How can you be a teacher and be so off the mark? And you get it with these organizations as well. You be so off the mark. What men need, and this is where Andrew, people like figures like Andrew Tate come in, is that a lot of what he says is really against the mark and is really, should we say, very controversial. But a lot of what he says is look after yourself, be healthier, improve yourself, and actually that resonates in young men. And someone who's probably better at it is somebody like Jordan Peterson, who literally tells men to kind of take responsibility and be that. Don't be afraid to be that strong character and tidy yourself up and dress better and speak properly and educate yourself. And all of a sudden now, men have this, and I'd be lying if I hadn't said that he genuinely helped me in some moments in my life where reading his literature was like, oh, okay, I need to turn a corner, I need to sort myself out here. That helped far more. Having a friend who had experience, having a father who had experience, helped me far more than me just quite simply having a chat with somebody on the phone who I don't know, who can't really actually appreciate or empathize with my situation. And that's what men need. Men need legitimate role models who have experience, who legitimately care about them and are able to say, right, pull up a sandbag. This is how it's going to be. This is what you need to do. Take note.
Yeah, definitely. I think the talking side needs to be like, this is my problem. Like, have you ever come across anything like this before? What have you done? How did that work for you? Like let's share those ideas, not let's just, oh yeah, bad day, mate.
Yeah, and the whole thing with, it's okay to cry and all that. I think it's really good. I think it's good to be healthy and to not bottle things up and to kind of identify that you're not okay with yourself. I think that's really, really good and that's really healthy. However, just sort of sitting there and crying about my problems isn't going to rectify my problems.
No.
I want solutions to my problems, and me sitting at home, crying about it into a Chicago town frozen pizza is not going to get me out of this hole that I'm in.
Yeah.
And for me, in my situation, I found myself in a very, what could have potentially been a very, very dark spot. What did I do about it? Well, I pulled up my socks and I said, actually, you know what? I'm going to throw myself into this. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to improve my situation, because then that will get me closer to being out of this hole. But it really could have gone both ways, Lewis. It really could have gone both ways, because I was very lucky that I had people in my life at the right time.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, the biggest issue that I sort of see is that it's a bit like, the problem in society is like, well, you might get to that point of something that someone else has got that's just off their shoulder, water off their back. They never have an issue. So I'm more about that. If you are in that position, it's irrelevant how you got there. It's exactly what you say. It's like, right. I described it in one of my first ever episodes as like, you're falling off a cliff, right? You're just falling. And it doesn't matter how deep in that cliff you are. You've got to throw a hand. You've got to throw a hammer into it. You've got to grab hold and then go, right, this is bad. But how do we get back up here? Not just be like, oh, going. Like, that's which can lead to problems.
It's like I mean, you are completely, it's self-indulgent to allow yourself to fall to that depth is self-indulgent. And that's not to say I haven't been guilty of it, like loads of times, especially as a young man. I was Mr. Self-indulgent, and I was absolutely, I would say, in a lot of respects, a complete narcissist. Being in this depth of, really what it was depression and hitting these low points and all that. And funnily enough, now, I found myself in a situation that was organically far worse than any situation I'd ever been in. But I dealt with it 1,000 times better. And the reason for that was, it was perspective, because I wasn't being self-indulgent. I couldn't be self-indulgent. Why? Because it wasn't about me anymore. It was about a little girl that I had to kind of square myself away for. And for me, that's why the whole situation has given me far more than I could than it's ever really taken from me, even though it's taken its pound of flesh. And I think when I see it in young men, and they are being self-indulgent, and they're just thinking about themselves and how bad the situation is, I'm like, oh, your situation is bad, is it? And that's what's good about the army, is that they put you into these situations where you are, at the time, truly miserable, and they train you to almost see it comically. And they say it to you all the time. They're like, "This is miserable. You're cold, wet, hungry, tired, everything. You've slept 40 minutes in 3 days. You're under pressure. Blah 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 blah." You'll look back at this as the best time of your life, and at the time, you're like, yeah, "F off! Absolutely no way. This is the most miserable time ever." Now you look back and you go, "You know what? I'd kill to be back with the lads doing that." Rado, do you remember that when that guy broke his ankle? Oh, it was a great time. You're thinking about it with rose tinted glasses, because the well gets deeper. Your well gets deeper through experience, and again, that's why I would always petition. I'd always beat the drum for young men. Oh, I don't know what to do. I'm a bit lost. What scares you? What scares you right now? What would literally give you butterflies with fear and excitement? Oh, it's this. Go do it.
Yeah.
And your well will just expand, and your capacity to deal with these things that actually are really remedial. Like they're really low level stuff. They're not a problem. Not a problem whatsoever. Money issues, place to live. What the army teaches you is that worst case scenario, sleeping at rough actually isn't that bad. I'll survive.
Yeah.
All of the worst things that could possibly happen, you'll survive it. You'll be fine. You're made out of tougher stuff than you think. And I'm a huge proponent for a lot of young men, if they're thinking about joining the military, to do it, because people inside the military is quite ironic. You see, young soldiers or whatever, and they're quite disenfranchised, and they're a bit like, I'd like to go back to the civilian world. You don't realise what the army's given you, and you won't realise it until you go back into the civilian world, and you'll be like, this is easy. Like, this is horizontal. Like, what's going on? And I see a lot of young men now who don't necessarily have the capacity to deal with problems. And I'm only saying that because I was one of them. Being 22, 23, living at home. Broke up with my girlfriend. Like, world ended. World crumbled. She was the best ever. I'm never going to do better. I'm gonna kill him. I'm gonna end it, because it's just so bad. You then get to 30 and you've done all this stuff, and you go, oh, that's nothing. Water off a duck's back. We can survive that.
Yeah.
Because you can survive all of these things as well. That, in your list of things that you can survive, that's like down there. It's easy.
Yeah.
And I think that's why men need mentorship. That's why men need experienced characters. That's why we tend to gravitate towards your David Goggins type characters, your Jocko Willing type characters, because these men have been in the arena. So when you hear them talk, and you're like, oh, Jocko, I'm a skinny guy and I've got no self-confidence, and get amongst it, big guy. Get amongst it, and take control. And then the young man goes, okay, yeah, well, that's all he needed. He needed 5 sentences to be like, sort yourself out, sort your shit out, do this, sort this out, and you're away. And they're like, brilliant, and off they go. And I think that's what we need, especially at the moment in the UK, is people who from the UK, who are these influential characters, who are able to do it in a British way.
Yeah.
Not, running shirtless down the road, screaming profanities, which I think is great. It inspires me 100%. Yeah. Maybe that's not the market here. I don't know. Is there another way of doing it?
I think I'm with you. I'm inspired by those people. I think they've got great stories. That was one of the reasons that I wanted to do this with everyday men. It was that it was getting parallels. Like not everyone's ran 100 miles through the desert with no water, and yeah, done some crazy stuff. And they're great stories and they're inspiring, but sometimes they're almost so out of reach that some men, not necessarily just British men, for me, I'm looking at like the 95%, the 90% of men, and like that might not even have aspirations of these grandeurs or these great things. They might just want to get to a certain point and want to find happiness within their arena, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do it with sort of everyday men, so to speak, rather than superheroes or people that have achieved great things. But I think some of the things that you're saying are so on point and so valuable. Uh, Go and do stuff. Go and experience life. At least you'll have some stories. Worst case, like that's the a motto from a film somewhere, I think. But yeah, it's so important to do. I think I've this is all new to me. I'm no expert in any way, shape, or form. I'm enjoying the whole thing. Really, it's great to see, and I'm hoping that we can make some dents into this crazy world that is. But one of the things that I've sort of recently discovered is you see these like big people and these influencers right now, and the majority of them is around sort of like picking up women. Essentially, is like if you do this and you're hyper successful and you're in great shape, you'll be they'll be swarming at you. And I think actually Andrew Tate or Tristan, one of those two, again, it's a snippet that gets lost because they do so much crazy stuff in between. I think they said, look, all that does is it gets you a ticket for the table. You've got to have other things about you. You've got to have other things. If you're just going to be a rich guy that's in great shape, you're just irrelevant because there's going to be so many other people with so many other things as well. So the irony is that if that's your ultimate goal as a 18, 19-year-old, then go do some stuff, get some stories as well.
100%. It makes you incredibly valuable, and I think where those guys become very influential is because they talk about value, and unfortunately, we probably should just come to accept it that men are valued on a certain scale. It's not really going to change anytime soon. We can try and train it out of people, we can try and teach it out or whatever, but effectively that's what it comes down to. You know, your personality is really going to get you so far on both ends of the spectrum, on both sides. I think in terms of learning how to become more valuable as a male, I think has its place and it has its importance. What I also think is really important, and it's not really spoken about too often, is how to. So I think men aren't educated in the ways of, in terms of ways of relationships, in the ways of what the whole space looks like. I think we as young men go into it very, very blind, and I think we commit loads of sins throughout relationships in terms of things that you really shouldn't do, whether that's something that just isn't good for the relationship, or should we say something that will make you less valuable to your partner, therefore more likely to experience heartbreak or potentially, lose somebody that you actually like. People can't help it if they're not attracted to anymore, right? That's not their fault. They're not bad people, and you're not a bad person for doing things that make them not attracted to you. However, what we can do is, I really think, again, through mentorship, men can help each other in relationships. Women talk about relationships. They talk about men a lot. They talk about dynamics and they give each other advice a lot. And for me, one thing I learned very early on was, like, if I have certain female friends, they gave me the best advice in terms of relationships, more so than any men. We were clueless. We were completely clueless. But the women were completely switched on. And when you're having a conversation with a girl over, there's a text message or anything like that, you're not necessarily just having a conversation with her. You're having a conversation with her and her friends. So it's like four brains versus one, and you as a guy just completely, you're out of your depth.
Yeah.
I don't think men need mentorship in order to just become, more valuable, whatever. But what they can do is, because let's be honest, a lot of what we're talking about with regards to, male suicide, which is just such a huge problem. A big part of that is relationships, and a lot of these suicides do come off of the back of ending of a relationship. For a lot of men, lose hope at the back end of a relationship. Okay, so smoking gun backwards. How can we try and rectify this situation? How can we try and help these people in these? Well, what you can do is you can try and help men identify certain, should we say, red flags in relationships where it isn't going to be healthy for them. Where you can help a man save himself before before he throws himself away or into something that isn't going to bear fruit. You can pre-warn somebody. So for me, in my situation, I knew what was happening was, I knew the writing was on the wall, let's say, before it actually happened. And that allowed me to prepare. That allowed me to sort of put things into place that meant that when it inevitably did happen, I just wasn't completely destroyed. And that all came from friends of mine that had been in similar situations that were like, just an FYI, mate, this is what's going to happen next. No way. No way. That next thing happens. FYI, this is now going to happen. Okay, then I started believing the system and going, okay, this is probably what's going to happen next. Start preparing. And then all of a sudden you're not knocked back when these things happen, right? And I think that's what men need. You don't necessarily need pickup artists. You don't necessarily need, more plates, more dates or whatever. And they all have their place.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're like, they are satanic and they need to be abolished and all that. If you want to go watch that, then you go watch that. I just think men right now need mentorship in these situations, as opposed to what you need is to get jacked, wear a V-cut t-shirt, get to a nightclub, and try to get the highest, in terms of a false ranking system, the highest level of female that you can try and yes, probably not best. Maybe try and find somebody who's got good values. Maybe try and find somebody who's in the same level as you. X, Y, Z. Okay, now what do I do? Right, well, you probably need to make sure that you are now taken care of on your side, so you can now provide for that relationship and you can be the best version of yourself for that other person. Okay, great. Now we can go from there. That I think saves men. I think that will give men probably what they actually need, what they actually are craving, is that little bit, again, guidance and mentorship.
Yeah, sort of coming back to all that. It's definitely a minefield, and I think, yeah, like you say, you just go through them pretty much on your own, really. And I think the only words of wisdom that most men get is plenty more fish in the sea, or the next one will be better type thing.
And it's not. It's not the way to go. It's absolutely not the way to go. We are completely getting it wrong in that regard at the moment. But also as well, relationships are relationships, and you were speaking earlier on about this sort of wheel and has all the segments. If a relationship ends and you are completely devastated and you're left picking up the pieces, maybe that segment was a little bit too big compared to the other seven. Maybe you needed to reduce that, and maybe you were losing yourself. And usually off the back of a relationship like that, where somebody kind of pulls the rug out from beneath you, is then when you turn around and realize, oh yeah, remember I used to do this, I used to do this, I used to be, I used to go here, I used to talk to this person. I don't talk to that person anymore. I don't go here anymore. I don't do that thing I used to do. And you realize, I think the biggest sin for me, men in relationships, is just completely losing yourself in that relationship. I think it's absolutely fantastic to be in love. I think it's absolutely fantastic to find that. And if you find it, brilliant. I just think the best thing for you is to maintain your frame as an individual and who you are. And I don't think a lot of men do that. They don't, and again, it comes from mentorship and guidance in terms of mental health. When having that conversation, for example, somebody was to call the Samaritans and be like, my girlfriend's left me, and da, da, da. Well, it's nice to sound that out, but also it'd be nice to hear on the other end of the phone somebody saying, okay, well, this is the situation, this is what's happened, da, 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 but actually you have this, actually you have that, actually you can just do this, and actually you'll be back on track in a very short period of time. But, okay, it's not so bad now. Yeah, I know
Yeah,
it's not so bad. Move on, you know. Um, Heartbreak will be heartbreak, and it's a rubbish thing to have to deal with no matter what, no matter who you are. I don't care. Um, but having that little bit of guidance and structure, I think, helps so many men pull out of the abyss, shall we say?
yeah, definitely. I think you're right. I think my my sort of moving away from mental health. I think it should be a byproduct. You will be in a good mental state based on the actions that you put forward. So for me, my sort of looking at this is like, yeah, what can you do today that allows you to be in a good mental state? So when you have bad days and good days, you can react responsibly and effectively, and not let it ruin your life and not take you further down. And I think the talking is exactly what you're saying. It's almost like a an ideas pit. It's like, have you tried this? You could do this. Let's look at this. Let's do this. And then that's the conversation rather than here's my problem. Here's my problem. Great. See you later. So yeah, I'm all for that. I think it's a good angle to sort of go down. So
It's not a disease that is chronic in the sense of, it's not like a meeting or a gathering of people that have a disease that they're going to eventually die from. So we
yeah,
usually, you're going to come and just sort of exchange ideas, or load ideas wrong. You're going to just exchange your experiences and kind of get it off your chest and learn to accept your lot. It's not. You don't need to accept your lot. Sounding out isn't going to do anything. You can completely change your situation. You can change your life. Um, so there needs to be less. There needs to be less saying. There just needs to be more doing. And once people realize that if they just do things and they get themselves out of the situation, if you're depressed and you're in bed every day, we've all been there. You're waiting for that day. That kind of that day. I always compare it to when Charlie brings home the golden ticket and his uncle just jumps out of bed and he's completely cured. Um, you're waiting for that day of that moment of inspiration where you just wake up one day and you go, you know what, I'm now inspired. It's not how it works. It's a much more manual thing. And the way you do it is you wake up, you have a shower, you shave, you fight against that dying of the light, you fight against that wave. And eventually you have to keep doing those steps day in, day out, day in, day out. Eventually you'll look back in 6 months' time, you'll go, oh, I made it. But
yeah.
it was incremental.
It's so important. I mean, the army obviously teaches that as well, but self discipline is so key to this, and it's not as difficult as people make out. It is like for me, I was like, it was the yeah. I was just existing. Like I wasn't doing anything bad. I wasn't like not. I was just not existing, and that wasn't me. And yeah, I just looked in the mirror one day and was like, probably should do something now. Like we're not achieving anything anymore. You've in your 30s. Like it's been 6 months since you turned 30. Like the business failed. Get over it. Just do something else. Like
And actually, what you have, again, perspective comes into it. There's not really too much now that I would say sort of, touch wood comes my way where I don't just sort of see it as, okay, well, this is actually, there is a reason for this. And it is absolutely going to lead to better things. Like the amount of times, again, you use the analogy of a relationship. a relationship will end, and you're like, oh my god, that person was the best person ever, and then you move on, and you just don't know what's around the corner. You don't know what's around the corner with regards to business and work. You just don't know what's around the corner. And what you realize is when you actually look at these really successful people and you see such a snippet of their existence on social media, what you don't see is the thousands of failures throughout their life, the thousands of moments where they were completely down and out and had absolutely no inspiration, had no hope. They edit that bit out of the Instagram, not on purpose, but this is their life now. And when they were back struggling, they didn't have a camera on them filming them 24/7, because that's not the person you want to film, right?
Yeah.
But they went through that, and one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard was, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah,
I think it's just so true. It's just so true.
It is, yeah. So I want to sort of move on to like what's next for you. You've obviously talking about Army is full-time job now. You've passed out, and you touched on the mentorship right at the beginning as something you were doing, and also what you're going to put in place for hopefully for men sort of in similar positions to yourself, because you're obviously self-representing now. So let's talk a little bit about that.
So what I'm looking to do is effectively create a blueprint for men who find themselves in a similar situation. And the reason for that being is that I was relatively passionate about that sort of subject before everything that happened. And then upon everything subsequently happening, I then started sharing my experiences in a very, very kind of small way. It was then, once I'd done that, I realized just how many people shared a similar experience, and that actually what we're dealing with at the moment is an epidemic. And if I was to say to you, or say to any person, I say, I could take away your liberty, I can take away your freedom, your education, your money. If I was to take away your children, that's the worst thing you could ever take away from an individual. And one question I tend to ask people quite regularly is, can you tell me the difference between that and a form of oppression? Because really what you're doing is you're going up to a demographic of individuals, and you're saying, you can't have your children, and we're going to take this amount of money away from you, and we're going to take these rights away from you as well, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and you have to be here at a certain time, and you have to do this. And nobody can really distinguish between that and oppression. So upon that, I just thought, well, we seem to have a bit of an epidemic here. Again, men's mental health, suicide. And one thing that's not really helping men at the moment is the law. Our system at the moment, in all honesty, is broken, to say the least. It's run by people who have effectively no empathy towards the plight of single fathers or single parents, for that matter. And when I got to a point where I was now like, £17,500 into solicitors' fees, and I hadn't even been to court yet, and I get another invoice for another set of emails, it was at that point I realized that something needed to be done. And so what happened was that I started representing myself, and I started talking to solicitors, barristers, anybody that I could speak to in order to gain any piece of information. How do I fill in this piece of paperwork? And what I actually came them to realize is that family law is quite possibly I'll use my words carefully here, family law is making a lot of money from the plight of others, and it's making a lot more money than it needs to. In the sense of, once I started representing myself and I knew what to do at the right time, I realized what I was paying for was effectively an email chain. But you have to be very careful, because you're emailing other representation. So all of a sudden, you're having arguments, or long-winded arguments, picking apart evidence and choosing words correctly with other representative solicitors. That took a little bit getting used to. And actually, in all honesty, Sandhurst helped me with that incredibly. The way I was able to present myself and present an argument and analyze information and all that kind of thing. So for me, what I'm looking to do in the future now is to create and come together with other people who are, should we say, more experts in the field, but effectively create a blueprint for single fathers to be able to represent themselves, or at least take the first step towards being able to represent themselves and see their, should we say, right the wrongs of what's currently happening. Because you know what, loads of men across the country are suffering, and it's pushing them towards the edge, and it's breaking them. And people don't have £17,000, and you shouldn't have to pay £17,000. You shouldn't have to pay a penny to see your child, because not only is it your human right, but it's your child's human right. So what you have at the moment is an epidemic of men who can't see their children, and you have seen an epidemic of children who can't see their fathers. And what we're realizing is that actually the biggest loser out of the whole thing is the children. Because statistically, by removing the father from a home, whether the parents are separated, or even if the father is, shall we say, not the most standout citizen in the world, statistically they're better off having him around. So really only the children are missing out. And it's something that I've become quite passionate about. So what we're looking to do in the future is effectively create a how-to guide. What that looks like is potentially a video series where it's not too, shall we say, literature heavy. And that will come down to literally the way you conduct yourself, the way you speak to your ex-spouse, the way you conduct contacts with your child, the way you conduct negotiations and communication with other solicitors, the way you conduct yourself at court, the way you contact the court. All of these little things, they need to be spoken about. That will set somebody up for success. Our system was created to protect, was created to protect people. I think it definitely does its job in doing that. But unfortunately, it did not foresee the nature of humans in the sense of that they will be willing to exploit the system. And right now what we have is a lot of individuals who are willing to exploit the system. So hopefully by creating this, I realize that I can't change the law. The only law I'm be looking to change is the law concerning fathers being present on a child's birth certificate. So right now, a woman can have a man's child. He could be fully wanting to be involved. He can be fully wanting to be a part of that child's life, etc. She doesn't have to include him on the birth certificate, therefore completely deny him parental responsibility. Nobody wins there. That's not a good move. So I'll be looking to, in due course, start a petition to try and get that law changed. That's something that I think is the first step towards a better future in this situation. But with regards to that, I really think I don't have the capacity to change all these laws and walk into the House of Commons, and unless I eventually make Prime Minister, which I very much doubt I ever will. But what I can do is I can try my best to arm fathers with the information, again, mentoring, guidance, that will effectively set them up for success, so they can actually go, you know what, I haven't seen my daughter for 6 months, but through this I can now see her once a fortnight. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. It's a game you have to play. You can't change the rules, unfortunately. It's
100%.
a bit odd.
And what men tend to do, and it's a narrative you hear all the time, what men tend to do is they become exhausted. And I've had it. I've had it where I've had my daughter, and she doesn't see me very often. Well, should we say nowhere near as often as one would like, and therefore she isn't as comfortable with me as she should be. And I've had her over, and she's been visibly uncomfortable for the majority of the time. So me as a father, me caring for her, I go, well, logically, it's now better off if I don't see her because she seems stressed.
Yeah.
So I don't want her to be stressed. So therefore, what will happen is that I'll just say, you know what, I won't see her because I don't want her to be stressed.
Yeah.
But actually, what it is, it's the other person's created an environment to try and set you up for failure, and has actually allowed that child to be stressed in order to win. And as tough as that may be, again, mentorship guidance, you can then talk to a man. He goes, yeah, happened to me. We need to do X, Y, and Z. This will help placate that problem. And you can't tap out. You can't bow out. And what I'm seeing a lot of is I'm seeing a lot of good men bowing out. And as soon as you bow out, you then become the bad man, because once you bow out, that person now has the child completely at their mercy, and then they can tell them whatever, and you can't really defend yourself because you left. So I think the biggest one there is sort of effectively training men to hold on, even if by their fingertips, very much like I've done in the past. You really hold on by the skin of your teeth. Train them to be able to do that.
It's important not to. I mean, I imagine there's, like you say, a lot of like lost hope, or just feel like they're doing the right thing for their daughter or son, and think that that's the right decision. But you fast forward 10, 15 years, and they become young adults, and you've not even got a chance of getting back there because, like you say, it's gone. And hold on, and things will sort of get better. And I think, like you've touched on before, not daft kids. They soon realise what's good. They understand. So,
and that right there is experience, and that right there, even you saying that, some people don't know that necessarily. And even hearing that as a father, and I've been told that several times, and sentences like that genuinely give me hope, which is good for me, but it's mainly good for my daughter, because it means I'll stay in the game longer, right? And I think those little gems that you just alluded to there, they are what men need. They are what men need, more so than having a chat.
Yeah, exactly. I'll clip that one up. First clip in. So yeah, I think it's a great thing. I've after this, I'll let you know about something that I worked on many years ago. It was more geared towards sort of everyone, both sides of the table. But I'm sure.
Yeah, I'd love to
have that sort of information. It's not relevant to this podcast at all. It's more useful to you. So I won't bore people with it. But I'll speak to you after about it.
Yeah, great.
So yeah, I've seen it from all angles, and yeah, I do think it's a really important thing that needs broaching. It's very illogical at times. It's designed to protect, and then like you say, it creates a minefield in a game. So yeah, I think it's going to be a very powerful tool for people to use, and hopefully keep some more good men in the game, as you like to say. So I look forward to seeing the result, and if I can help.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a whole other podcast in itself, that one.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. So Connor, I genuinely really appreciate your time this evening. It's been great. It's been fun. It's been emotional. And yeah, I've learned a lot. I can't wait to. I'm going to get you to mentor me as well. I feel like you've.
Oh, mate, mentorship goes both ways as well. Remember, so vice versa. I think anybody who has experience in anything, there's certain things that I've got experience in, and then there are other things I've got. I'm sure I'd love to pick your brains about.
Awesome, cool. So yeah, I'll leave the floor to you. Is there anything that you want to specifically end on? Anything you want to sort of summarize or wrap up on?
Yeah, I mean, nothing in particular. I think it's just, you know, find whatever you are afraid of, just steer towards it, and then let God do the rest. You know, whether you're a religious person or not, you just have to allow things to play out. And if you're really stressed about something now and you feel like the world's upon you, um, honestly, wait it out. You know, in 24 hours, a lot can change. Your life can change, and you'll be looking back thinking, "Why on earth was I stressed about that thing?" Um, your time will come. Absolutely. You just have to keep in the game, as we keep saying.
Perfect. I've literally got nothing to add. So yeah, thanks once again, and I'll see you guys in the next one.